Okay, if you recall, I said that topic 1, which was called Developing an Effective Workforce, Recruitment, Selection and Training, I was going to break into 2 parts because it would have been too long to look at it all at once. So this is the second part of that topic. So now we're looking at training. So we've assumed that we've recruited and selected our employees. Now how do we go about training them? First things first, let's get your key terms sorted out. So these are the 3 new ones that you're going to come across in this topic. So training is the provision of work-related education, either on the job or off the job. You'll come across what that means later. Involving either employees being taught new skills, so something entirely different, or improving skills that they already have. Induction training is a specific type of training that is education for new employees, which usually involves learning about the way the business works rather than about the particular job the individual will do. So you might be learning who you work with, where the toilets are, how you ring in sick, things like that, rather than actually doing particular tasks. And then finally, there is on-the-job training. On-the-job training is where, not finally actually, there's another one, is where an employee learns a job by seeing how it is carried out by sitting next to or watching an experienced employee. You might also see this called sitting next to Nelly. So Nelly's the person who knows what she's doing, and on-the-job training is sitting next to Nelly and watching what she's doing. Oh, that cut off a little bit there. But off-the-job training, so you might want to listen to this while you write this one down, is all forms of employee education apart from at the immediate workplace. So if you go to college, for instance, if you go to university to train, if you even do some training in the building where you work but not doing your actual job. So if you work on the factory floor and you go into a different room in the organisation to learn how to use a new machine, that would still be classed as off-the-job training. You do have to be careful though. You've got to distinguish between training and what we call development. Lots of people think that they're the same thing. Training is the process of instructing individuals about how to carry out tasks directly related to their job. Development, though, involves helping individuals to realise their full potential. So development covers growth in a very general sense and is not necessarily related to particular skills that the employee has for the post or the job that they do. So in a sense, if you look at it like teaching, training for a teacher might be learning how to do a new specification or learning how to teach a new qualification. But development might be sending them on a leadership course, even if they're not currently in charge of people. But it could mean that in the future, because they've done a leadership course, that might enable them to move up in the organisation. So development would be that training course to help them do a job that they're not doing at the moment. Training would be helping them do the job that they are at the moment. We've got to be aware that training is like anything else that the business spends its money on. They've got to decide whether it's justified. So they have to spend money on things that possibly as many people as possible can benefit from in terms of training. So if you're going to spend £1,000 that might help develop 4 people, or £1,000 developing 1 person, then logically you'd want to develop as many people as possible. So we have to remember that even though we're not necessarily looking at a new business now in Bus 2, we have to think that whatever training we're trying to implement has to be effective. We have to make sure that by spending that money on our workforce, we're going to in some way get that money back. So we have to look at the actual training needs of an organisation. So the need for training basically comes from the knowledge and skills required from the firm. Either they're not there, so we need different knowledge and skills in order for the business to get better, or they are different. The skills and knowledge that our employees have are different from those that we need. So either, say for instance, if we're trying to launch a new product, does our staff have the ability to make that new product? If not, we need to train them. It's often a response to some sort of change in the need we have for training, whether this be internal or external. So again, it might be that There's a development or the introduction of a new product. There might be a restructuring of the firm. So it might mean that there are less managers. So perhaps supervisors need to be trained on how to look after people more effectively. It could mean that you were opening up a new branch overseas. So part of the training could be that people learn to speak a new language. The development and introduction of new technology. It's pointless introducing technology if our staff don't know how to use it, so they need training. There might be changes to procedure, including improvements on customer service. So if we know that part of our business is keeping our customers happy, and we're not particularly good at that, training might be to help our employees get better at that. We might need training because of high labour turnover. Remember, I've mentioned that briefly, but labour turnover is the amount of people leaving in a given period. So one thing that absolutely leaves when someone leaves an organisation are the skills and the knowledge that that person has. So in order to make up for that, a new employee might need training. It might be a response to low morale. People often feel better when they're trained, if they know exactly how to do a job. If you feel as though you're floundering, if you feel as though you don't really know what you're doing, that can lead you to feel demotivated, which can lead to low morale. And then there might be changes in legislation. So it might be health and safety legislation, which means people have to be trained in first aid or how to evacuate a building more effectively. So those are all the different reasons why we might have to train our employees. Okay, let's look at the benefits of training. Training can help new employees reach the level of performance that we want from them and the level of performance that other employees want of them, people that they work with, a lot quicker. So if you work with someone and you all work on a team, if a new member of the team can't do what you can, you might become frustrated with them, you might become demotivated, which could impact productivity. It could mean that you don't work as hard because you feel as though you're doing all the work and your colleagues aren't. Training also ensures that employees have the necessary skills, the knowledge, the attributes and the qualifications to do the job both now and in the future. It develops a knowledgeable and committed workforce, which means that motivation and job satisfaction might go up. If you are motivated and satisfied with the job, you might become more committed to staying with the organisation. Remember, if you're committed, that might mean labour turnover goes down. If labour turnover goes down, we don't have to employ new staff. Because we don't have to employ new staff, that might save us money, but it also means that we're keeping all those skills inside the business. Training can also help increase efficiency and productivity, so the amount of things that we make in a given period and how good and how much money we don't waste making those things. So this enables the firm to produce high quality products and services, which may in turn lead to more profit. It can also identify employees' potential and thus increase employees' job prospects and chances of promotion, which might improve motivation. And we know that if we can promote from within, perhaps that might save us some money as well. It reduces costs in the long term as well by reducing the number of accidents and injuries. It reduces the amount of waste because people know how to make products properly. In the same way, it reduces poor quality work, and it also increases productivity. Remember, I've said there though, in the long term. So as part of an evaluation point, in the short term, let's think about what a negative might be. Well, training doesn't come for free. Either we go external and we have to pay someone to come in which case that's going to cost us money in the short term, but in the long term it might reduce costs. Or even if the training is done on the job, whilst you're at your place of work, you're not going to be as productive and the person training you isn't going to be productive. So in the short term, that might cost us as well. So I'm just going to give you a little reminder there that in the short term, training can have a negative cost, but in the long term, if we do it properly, and that goes back to that previous slide when we were talking about evaluating training, if we do it properly, then it should save us money. It encourages employees to deal with change more effectively and to be more flexible. So for example, introducing new technology. If people know that they're going to be trained if something changes in the business, they're going to feel more comfortable when that change occurs, so they'll be more flexible. It also encourages employees to work towards the organisation's aims and objectives. That kind of links to this idea of a committed workforce. So if you feel as though you're being looked after by the organisation, you might be more inclined to do what you're asked. It also improves the image of the company. So customers will have more confidence in a well-trained member of staff, and a better image therefore will attract more able, more talented new recruits when it comes to recruiting and selecting new employees. What you must remember though, that's if training is done correctly. Don't ever fall into the trap of automatically assuming that training, how do I spell that right? Training always equals more profit, for instance. That's not always the case. We have to do it properly. We can't just assume, right, we've trained our workforce, we're going to be successful. All depends, we have to make sure that we choose the right type of training and we do it properly. So induction training then. The aim of induction training is to help new employees settle in as quickly as possible in order to ensure that they reach the level of performance expected of those experienced workers. It includes familiarising new employees with the layout of the business and the building, health and safety issues, security systems, key personnel, so who their managers might be, who they're responsible for, the hierarchy of the organisation, so this is the person right at the top, this is the owner or the directors, the main policies of the organisation, so again how to apply for holidays, how to ring in sick. It could be the culture of the organisation, so these are the things that we believe in this organisation, the history, where it came from, how long it's been around. It could be rules and regulations, what happens if things go wrong. It could be any benefits that the employees get, so things like bonuses or shares in the organisation. Basically, it's getting the new employee used to working there so they know everything that they need to know so they can become efficient and effective as soon as they possibly can. When I worked at Malmaison, we did some research looking at how people make an opinion about an organisation, and we found out that within 7 minutes people will decide whether they like or dislike an organisation based on their induction training, and it can take up to 7 months to change that. So if you get induction training wrong, it can take up to 7 months for that person to become effective and productive. So we must get induction training right, because if not, we're wasting money in all that time that the person isn't effective. So an effective induction program is likely to reduce labour turnover because people will feel welcomed, they'll know what they're doing, so they're less likely to want to leave straight away. It'll improve a new employee's understanding of both the corporate culture, so the way the business is run, the things that the business believes in, and the situation in which the organisation is placed. So is the business making money? Is it successful? Is it facing a lot of problems at the moment? It can mean that employees contribute to the organisation more quickly. So as soon as they understand what's going on, they can more effectively and more efficiently do their job. And again, it can increase motivation. Not just the new employees who will be motivated because they know what's going on, they don't feel like the new person for too long, but also it motivates existing staff because they know that new staff will be inducted into the organisation as quickly as possible and will be able to do the job well. So as I mentioned at the beginning, there are two different places or methods of training, and it can be external training or internal training. So let's look at how we decide between the two. External training, such as joining a college course on management, for instance, or how to be a supervisor, is appropriate if there are only a few employees and they have a very specific training need, or if the training requirements are not specifically linked to the organisation. External training gives employees the opportunity to meet new people from other organisations, so that's definitely a positive, because it allows kind of an exchange of ideas and it helps people to broaden their understanding. It can also make employees feel valued because they know that they're being trusted outside the organisation, which means it can increase motivation. But if you're sending someone on a course, if you're allowing 2 or 3 people out of your organisation to be out of the business for a day or for a week or a month or however long, not only does that business have to make sure that person's job is still being done whilst they're out of work, they also have to pay for that training. So external training can be very costly. So we do need to make sure that it's appropriate. So remember, it's whether it's only for a few employees or whether they need to be trained in a thing that's not specific to an organisation. So leadership, for instance, management isn't specific to one organisation, that's just a general skill. But using a particular machine in a factory, that's very specific, and therefore you wouldn't necessarily want to do that externally. Internal training is appropriate if training needs are specific to the individual organisation. So for example, if employees need to learn how to use that particular machine in a factory that I've just mentioned. So we have to make sure that we look at how many employees are going to be needed to be trained. So if it's lots, then we would look at internal. If it's a few, external. Cost, generally external is more expensive, so we need to be careful that we're going to make sure we see a return. So expensive is external usually, but doesn't mean that's always the case. And then internally we look at inexpensive. And then, do we need specific skills to the organisation? So specific skills, we would look at internal, generic skills, external. Let's look at, now we've chosen whether we should go external or internal, whether we should do on the job or off the job. On the job is likely to be cheaper than off the job, as existing employees and equipment can be used. Such training takes place in a realistic environment. Therefore, this avoids any problems in adjusting, say, between a college and a work situation. So we don't have to think, right, this is how I did it in college, how do I do it at work? It doesn't matter because you've always done it at work. So there's no loss of output. It doesn't mean that you have to spend another couple of days working out how to apply what you've learned in college into the workplace. But the quality of training depends on the ability and the willingness of the instructor, so Nelly, if you remember sitting next to Nelly, and also the time that they've got to do it. The employee who is chosen to be the instructor might be unable to teach the proper skills, or might have developed bad habits or shortcuts, and they'll be passed on to the trainee, so the bad habits are getting worse possibly. In addition, the work situation might be noisy and stressful and not conducive to effective learning. Also think, if you're paid by the unit, so if you're making tables, for instance, and you only get paid for every table that you make, if you're training someone, you perhaps might not get paid as much because your output might go down because you're training someone. So you could feel unwilling to do it because of that. So off the job may be conducted internally, so it might be in a conference room or just a different room in a factory, for instance, or it might be external at a college. Either way, there is less immediate pressure from work because you're away from your day-to-day job. Employees might attend college during working hours through the day or on block release, so you might go for a month at a time or a week at a time, or in the evening or at weekends. The training will be focused on skills, attitudes and theories that relate to work, and is likely to include generic skills and knowledge that are useful at work in general, rather than for a specific job. So remember, that's this idea of learning management skills rather than how to use a machine. Off-the-job training uses specially trained experts to do the teaching. This may result in training being more highly valued by employees, leading to increased motivation. If it is also external, off-the-job training will give employees an opportunity to meet staff from other organisations and to learn about their systems. In general, it is more straightforward to estimate the cost of this type of training as well, and therefore it's easier to monitor how effective this type of training has been. but it can be more expensive, and there is a question as to whether the skill learned can be transferred to the actual workplace. So just because we've learned how to be a leader, does that mean we know how to lead the particular members of staff that we've got? So remember I said we have to evaluate whether the training that we're doing is making any difference, whether it's any good. It's no point spending £1,000 on training if it's only going to make us £500 back. So we have to think of whether it's being good for us. So evaluation of training is reasonably easy if the output can be observed. So for example, the effective use of a computer or the production of a product. But it is more difficult in relation to management training courses. So how can we tell for sure that a manager is better at managing people? In these type of situations with management training, for instance, questionnaires are needed to assess people's views and perceptions before and after the course, and possibly like a month later, 2 months later, something like that. In relation to customer care courses, businesses could possibly use mystery visitors or mystery shoppers who act as members of the public to check on how staff are responding to customers after their training. If it's better, then the training was worth it. If it isn't, then it wasn't worth it. Training can also be evaluated by monitoring improvements in the quality of output. So if we're making tables, are the tables of a better quality? If they are, the training was worth it. We could reduce, or we could monitor any reduction in labour turnover. So if less people are leaving over the course of the year, possibly that's because they feel more valued because the training that they received was good. We might judge it by the amount of people going for internal promotions. We're only going to promote people to higher positions in the business if they are capable. Potentially, they only get capable because they've been trained well. We might measure it by the amount of accidents. Less accidents might occur because people know how to do their job properly, therefore the training has worked well. And if we make less mistakes and we waste less, that is probably because we've been making sure that our employees are well trained. In terms of an evaluation question on the exam, as with any area of the business, we have to weigh up the evidence and consider the situation of the business before we decide whether the training has worked or not. So we could use any of these methods to decide whether the business has effectively trained its workforce. So look out for any way that we could use that in any of the case study, any of these things in the case study. If we can, that's what we can say how they can monitor training. If not, then you should look for things like, as I've said, quality, customer service, labour turnover, and wastage. So look for those type of things in the case study to show whether training has been effective or not. Training and market failure then, right? This is something that not many people think about in terms of training, but it's quite an interesting point. So you might have heard the phrase market before. So market's basically where what we say buyers and sellers meet. So that's something we looked at in bus 1. Now this is where this idea of supply and demand come into fruition. So a market is where the forces of supply and demand operate without the government interfering. The labour market is where the supply of labour comes from people wanting jobs, and the demand for labour comes from the organisation who wishes to employ people. So if supply meets demand, so if the number of workers supplying their labour is met by the number of organisations demanding it, then everyone will have a job, for instance. If there is more demand for labour than there is supply, then people will be in demand, so they can possibly expect more pay because everyone wants them. If there is more supply of labour than there is demand for it, then that's what happens. That's what leads to unemployment. Market failure occurs when supply and demand fails to be productive or fails to be efficient. So as I've said here, when supply outstrips demand, that could lead to unemployment, for instance. So that's what we mean by market failure, when supply isn't meeting demand or demand isn't meeting supply. Let's think of an example. So markets might fail when things such as pollution are not fully accounted for. We call these externalities. So for instance, a firm that pollutes the atmosphere by industrial activity will fail to pay for their actions and therefore make more profit at the cost of the environment. In which case, we say that the government should intervene because the market has failed. That's not yet got anything to do with training, so how can I relate that to training? Well, a similar analysis can be applied to training and the issue of poaching trained employees, stealing trained employees. Poaching employees means attracting workers who have already been trained by another business. So say, for instance, Tesco wants workers with a particular skill that can only be acquired from training. It might attempt to poach this type of employee from Asda, who has already trained its workers in that particular skill. So it might be customer service, for instance. Poaching would mean attracting these workers by offering higher salaries or better holidays, for instance. This saves Tesco the cost of training, but also means that Asda has wasted time and has wasted money in training their workers in good customer service who have now gone to Tesco. If this is done widely in an economy, poaching or stealing staff might lead to employers like Tesco, like Asda, to stop or very much reduce how much they train their employees. They will realise that it is pointless training employees who have left, who then leave them, not just to leave them because they don't want to work at all, but they go to their competitors. So rather than training, Asda might start to steal their staff from Sainsbury because they will think it's more cost effective to poach or to steal ready trained staff. So because Tesco has stolen staff from Asda, Asda have decided, let's not bother training our staff anymore, let's steal them from Sainsbury's. If those staff leave, the firm does not lose out on the result of having paid for their training. So if Asda steals staff from Sainsbury's and then those staff then go on to Tesco, doesn't matter because it wasn't Asda who paid for the training, it was Sainsbury's. In this way, the market leads to inefficiencies rather than efficiency, and it may be desirable for the government to intervene. So for example, providing tax incentives for an organisation to train their own staff. So they might say to Asda, you have to pay less corporation tax, less tax on your profits, as long as you train 1,000 staff a year. Without some sort of government intervention, such market failure will damage the skill level and therefore the competitiveness of the workforce, because there's no new training being done. We're just stealing staff from one another. In general, research suggests that firms in the UK fail to invest sufficiently in training and development. They view training as a cost and failing to consider the long-term benefits to the organisation and to the employee. So remember when we talked about training, I said you have to remember that in the short term there might be a cost, even though you might make that cost back in the long term. But managers in the UK tend to only look at that short-term cost. In addition, training programs tend to be developed in response to current problems rather than to predict in the future what we might need. So yes, it's called firefighting. So you're only ever training people in what problem has come up now, rather than training your staff well to avoid the problem in the first place. So just a little tip for the exam then. Just to remind you, you might get asked to evaluate. So remember, that's best and worst, or most, stroke least, important, and you look at short term and long term. So you might be asked to evaluate the best method of training. Don't forget to weigh up the evidence of pros and cons, which you've already put somewhere else in your answer, and those pros and cons must relate to the case, not just generic, general pros and cons, but what will the pros and cons be to the organisation, the case, and think about the context of the business. So has the business, has it got lots of competitors who are well trained? Have they not got very much money? So internal training might be better. So think of the case study, think of the context before you decide which is the best method of training.